Welcome back to Dreaming Against the Machine. I'm your host, Adam Becker. This week's guest is Alondra Nelson, who is a sociologist of science at the Institute for Advanced Study in Princeton and used to run the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy under Joe Biden. And I feel like that right there tells you why I wanted to have her on this show, but I think politics is important. I think politics is something that happens the minute that you have more than one person in a room. And I think that it will always be with us. And I think that governance and policy are important things. And if we are going to think about what a better future could look like, we are going to need to talk about what a better politics and policy should look like. And that means that we have to talk with people who have been on the inside. And Alondra spans two worlds, that world, but also the world of studying science itself from the inside and the outside. And that's something that she and I have in common. And so I thought she would make a great guest for this show. And unsurprisingly, I was right, but that says a lot less about my acumen in picking guests for the show and a lot more about Alondra herself. So here's Alondra. Alondra, welcome to Dreaming Against the Machine.
Thank you, Adam. Good to see you.
Yeah, it's good to see you too. It's been a minute. I was out there last fall when you very kindly invited me down to Princeton to have me go to that wonderful talk by Will Oliver.
Yeah, we're trying to think about quantum. I mean, my lab works in the space of emerging technologies, and so trying to get a beat on quantum as it's much like genomics and AI. It's got the commercialization space and it's got the basic research space, and those things aren't quite aligned, and so it makes for a fascinating discussion.
Yeah, no, and that was also very helpful when I was writing that quantum computing story for Scientific American. I guess it was the June issue.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, but this is also a good segue to introducing you. I would attempt to introduce you, and I would be terrified of getting it wrong. Can you tell us what your lab works on, and more generally, who you are?
So I'm a sociologist of science and technology, always with a through line thinking about social implications, social inequality. I have had lots of faculty appointments. So I've been on the faculty of Yale, at Columbia, and now I'm at the Institute for Advanced Study. And I have a lab called the Science, Technology, and Social Values Lab. And we look at, right now, we're working a lot on AI and the social implications of AI, but thinking about my previous work has been on genetics and genomics. And I'm also I'm interested very much in outer space policy, quantum, and its implications. What else to say? I mean, I had imagined my life if I was thinking about futures, not against the machine, but against what my plan was for my life. Did not include politics or a political appointment, but in 2016, I started working on what was going to be my third monograph, and it was going to be on science and technology policy in the Obama administration. So I started interviewing folks who had worked at DARPA, OSTP, et cetera, but it was really more of a book on the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy. Through that research and coming to know lots of people who work in that space, I was asked to work on after there was a Biden-Harris ticket, to work on the campaign, writing policy memos, trying to think about, in a prior moment, how to, quote unquote, as the campaign said, build back better, but build back better things that had been happening in the space around science and research. And then I was asked to consider being interviewed for a leadership role in the Office of Science and Technology Policy. And I ended up working there for just over 2 years at OSTP, doing policy on AI and other things. So there's a kind of before and after, and that since that time I've done, I think academics always like to imagine that our work has social implications. And if you're writing an NSF grant, you've got to think about the broader impacts, et cetera. But since that time, I've come to be working, very much in thinking about policy, both in kind of public discourse and, and collaborating with policymakers. So I am, a sociologist who's thinking about dream against the machine, I guess, or thinking about futures and how, but now, having worked in Washington, I have a new tool, which is like how policy helps to potentially, done well, done at its best, can also help to steward futures that we want and mitigate futures we don't want.
Great. And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, that you're being overly modest here. You ran the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy for a time, didn't you? You were in charge of it.
I did, yeah. For just under a year, I was the acting director of OSTP. So that portfolio includes everything from astrophysics to agriculture to genomics, pandemics, AI, quantum. It was the not anticipated, but it was the honor of a lifetime, and it was it's an incredible team. And I think I learned a lot as a researcher, as a social science researcher, about collaboration, because I think many of us work in fields that are you can work on a big collaboration, but you can also just do the one-off book. And I had mostly been somebody who worked in small collaborations or one-off. And the incredible thing about a place like OSTP, which during my time had, a team of it's still a small White House agency, but about 150 people, was that they come literally from all over the country, from all walks of life. I mean, our world, talking to you as a former lapsed, I don't know how you would describe yourself, academic, Adam, journalist, academic turned journalist.
Yeah.
We think we live in this like very variegated world, and we're really like one degree of separation from like pretty much any other academic, even if you're in a different field,
Yep.
there's some kind of, yeah. And this was just like, I literally did not know these people, and we did not have overlapping, even, it was like 3 degrees of separation. So then how do you do a project? The project, which is the sort of mission of advancing what we hope is, positive outcomes with and through science and technology for more than 330 million people. Like, wow. Academics are like, we can collaborate, but do we like each other? And like, do we want to have coffee together? Do we want to be at conferences together?
Yeah.
And, I think working in the White House, the answer to all those questions is like, no. But we are, we are united in this mission that's just bigger than all of that. So I've come back, part of what I've brought back for me from Washington is I think more agility in being a good collaborator. I had been at IIS since 2019. I established my lab when I got back here because I wanted to be able to kind of operationalize what I learned about collaboration. So that's one thing to say about DC.
Well, I have to imagine that given what's happened since you left DC, the return of Trump, that you are not happy with what's going on with science and technology policy in the US right now. And I mean, let me let you respond to that, and then I will tell you what I think, and we can talk about it.
We work in different parts of the kind of research ecosystem, so I would love to hear what you think about this. I mean, there's a couple of ways to answer. To begin, I think, there's the question that happened, right after the election that I got was like, oh, you worked on all this stuff and now there's a new administration and it's probably all going to disappear. And don't you feel sad? And I think what you learn working, as a political appointee is that another administration, even if it's a different, even if we had been followed by a Kamala Harris administration, would have just had different priorities, and some things advance and some things don't advance. And you like literally should not, I hope. I mean, many people do, like, cannot take it personally. Like, that's just the like churn of administrations. And so I've never taken, I think, any of the churn or the change or the, halting or transformation of the work that we've done in OSTP personally. I think, as a thinking person, I think we had figured out in many instances the best way to do the thing, and so I think with the sort of arrogance of the thinking, sometimes overthinking person, we thought, like, we figured this out. Like, can't you see this is the best plan? And, let other people have different ideas. So, so that's the kind of small answer. The big answer is that what we're facing right now is, fairly catastrophic for the American research ecosystem. The United States is the world's single biggest funder of research and development worldwide. And so even if a year ago or so, folks were saying, well, maybe the EU kind of horizon grants and funding, or, France is doing this and there are these different projects. And US expenditures to research and development really just dwarf all of those. And so when the US sort of pulls back, much like and not unrelated to what's happening in geopolitics, when the US sort of changes its R&D ecosystem, it's actually changing the whole world system, right? It's changing a market system, it's changing a geopolitical system, and obviously it has all of these national security implications as well. And so, we're in the midst of a kind of chaotic reordering, and in the middle of that are the loss of people's lives and livelihoods, the loss of, I think, long-term investments we had begun to make in young people and just sort of the capacity of lots of young people, K to 12 through postdoc, to be able to do science wherever they kind of fit in or slot in there. And just the capacity to, to know at a time where we're trying to, we've got AI, this kind of emerging technology. What do we know about it? What can we know about it? What do we know about its basic foundations, its social implications? And I think the sort of rug pull for really important technological changes that are happening now, and then on top of that, this kind of whole reordering is really just catastrophic. And, I was speaking to someone about this recently, and they said, well, and they were playing devil's advocate, and I totally appreciate it. They said, well, 2 years, another administration comes back, Congress puts all the money back and it's all fine, right? It's like, no, it's not all fine. Actually, we have broken rules and norms. We've broken contracts. Universities that had built capacity to do research can't just put that back when you no longer have the people doing the work. People are changing fields. We've lost the goodwill and trust of some of our, I started talking about collaboration, some of our our collaborators. And I don't know how you get that back. And so it is. I think it's easy to focus on what's happening at NSF. And for my own discipline, they've dissolved the Social and Behavioral and Economic Research Directorate in full, which was like, I think, 1% of the NSF budget. So there's all of that. And then there's like our inability for Congress to really exercise its power to ensure that money that is appropriated is being used for the things it's supposed to be used for. So even if all of the budgets stay the same or come back, we now have created a practice in government in which the money that's appropriated doesn't actually go for the vision that the people's representatives in Congress say science and technology should be doing, be invested in, et cetera. So it's a mess. It's a bit of a mess. What do you think?
I mean, everything that you just said sounds about right to me, but I just keep thinking about, I'm going to make a comparison that I'm always hesitant to make. My first book was about the history of quantum physics.
Mm-hmm.
Quantum physics has been around for about 100 years, and most of the originators of it were in Germany. Between World War I and World War II was when we first really came up with the first real theories of quantum physics, and the rise to power of Hitler changed the way that science was done in Germany. Germany had been far and away the world's premier scientific superpower.
Yep.
The international language of science was, if anything, German. And then Hitler came to power, and immediately, one of the very, very first things that his government did was to fire everyone Jewish who was in the civil service, which included every single Jewish university professor. And so just very, very quickly, science in Germany was decimated. That was the beginning, or depending on how you look at it, I guess, the end of a process where the US became the world's scientific superpower, and English became the international language of science. And this just looks a lot like that. And I mean, okay, listeners, for those of you who don't know, which I guess would be most of you, one of the reasons I'm hesitant to make these comparisons is my family has a history with persecution by the Nazis. My grandfather's entire immediate family was murdered by the Nazis. And so I don't take it lightly making these comparisons, and of course there's the old internet rule, Godwin's law, comparisons to the Nazis mean that you lose the argument. But this does seem like an echo of that. It seems like, history rhyming, as it were.
Yeah.
And I am not sure how we come back from this. I mean, everything you just said, the part where I was thinking, yeah, that's what I've been telling people when I talk about this is when you said, yeah, we can't just put the funding back. That doesn't fix everything because, some things that are done can't be easily undone. And this is not to say that the system that we had in place before was perfect.
Hallelujah.
Yeah.
Hallelujah.
There were all sorts of problems with it, but certainly it's much, much better than what's going on right now. But this is dreaming against the machine, and we try to think about what a good future might look like. And so
Yes.
I'm going to put you on the spot, Alondra. You just said that you don't know how we build it back, but how do we get this back? Assume that, in 2 years, Trump and his cronies are gone permanently this time. What do we do? How do we build a better future for scientific research, not just in the US, but around the world?
Well, first of all, let me just say I'm so sorry about your family history. That's, traumatic and catastrophic. And I totally resonate with what it takes for you to make that comparison more than even others of us, right?
Thank you.
Not something you take lightly.
No.
If I'll just talk about my own background, I mean, I think one of my early projects, and I don't know if we're going to talk about this, was trying to build out what we now call Afrofuturism. But, part of what was in the early thinking of Afrofuturism's kind of canonical sort of essay was really like, how do you come from a past, which is the descendants of enslaved people who like literally had no agency over their future and like imagine other kinds of futures. And so that for me is, I think, fuel for the necessity of having, if not optimism, hope, and always trying to find other ways, new ways, orthogonal ways, trickster ways of thinking about what we might do in the future. And so I think exactly to your point, like as a sociologist of science and technology, I would probably position most of my past work in the space of reform. So I was never like status quo, so great. Or, like sitting here in my office in IAS, you think about somebody like Oppenheimer and the Manhattan Project, so great that we use all of our talents to like bomb things, and kill people. Like, no, It's not amazing that places like the precursor to the NIH, like experimented on Black people, experimented on Black soldiers, did unethical research. Like, not great that many communities have been excluded from even being able to do science. I mean, so there's just so many things that were just not fantastic, but that we're getting better, and that there was at least a space to have a conversation about. So, that said, last summer, about a year ago, I started a project with a colleague who teaches at UC Santa Cruz named Jenny Reardon, and we call it the Public's Science. And it is exactly to your point, Adam. It's like, if we are going to build something else, or we're going to have to, what should that look like? And we thought that it should be much more publicly engaged, much more publicly accountable, much more sort of transparent to the public. Some of the work that I did working in the Biden administration, and some of, you saw a little bit of this in the Obama administration as well, their 8 years of science policy, was trying to do a little bit more of that. So one of the policies I worked on was making a federally funded research findings or papers, like the initial, freely available to American taxpayers, right? So just this, this sort of came to a head during COVID, where the science was moving really fast, and the public were experiencing paywalls as like, people trying to keep information from them about fast moving science. In some instances, they're just like, oh no, I've got to pay to get access to my own paper that I wrote. No, it's not just, no, it's not a kind of vast conspiracy. So we convened a bunch of people, about almost 22 dozen people. And we are doing a double special issue of the Annals of Political and Social Science that'll come out, I think, probably in October. And it's just soliciting from lots of people other ideas. I don't have the ideas, but I think it can be, in a moment in which you have a kind of MAHA movement that's saying we don't trust vaccines and we don't trust science. Like, I don't know what to do about that. I will say, there are parts of the Black tradition that are very distrustful of science as well. So I know how to do what to do about that. And I think you give people access to information and you can't control whether or not they create a big red string, kind of thing on their wall with it, but you try to give them the access to the information. And I think a first step is that. And so, we've got lots of, what do we need to do with the NSF? Could the NSF be structured differently? Should we have an office of community-based innovation? How do members of the public, what have we learned from, about 20 years of community-based participatory research in some of our fields? Like, do they work? Do they not work? How do we assess them? And there's lots of other people I know working on similar projects. The hard thing has been watching all of this kind of chaos and destruction that I think many of us wanted to sort of have a kind of strong defense. And I think the defense that we want to have of the status quo, if we want to have one at all, is a very soft defense, right? It's not like this was not what we wanted, and there were lots of problems. And I think, for me, it was like this has been, the R&D ecosystem has been very much imperfect, but I think that we were sort of getting better. So what can we imagine? I think we can imagine. I mean, one of the things that was surprising to me, Adam, when I worked in government was like how little we knew about like where money went. I think governments need to make public good choices about the commons that are not about a cost benefit analysis in a strict market sense. Like, we just need vaccines for everybody. And and we just need to pay for it. Like, for example, it's not like, how do we afford it? We just figure out a way to afford it. For example. So I want you to hear, I'm not saying I want like for every federal investment in science and technology, for every federal investment in physics, we want a kind of ROI calculation. But I was struck in my time working in government how little we know about like where things are spent. Like if someone asked you, Alondra Nelson's had some, federal grants, what federal grants has she had over X many years and what has she been working on? Like there was no way to find that information. Like there's no Seriously, right? So there's fields, people are trying to do more science of science, meta science, science of social science, which have their, are imperfect in their own ways. But I think our attempts at just getting more visibility, and I think things like that will be helpful in giving the public at least more information about kind of what's happening with, federal expenditures. So there's that. But also we could just imagine like, right now, we are building, what's being built out right now is like technology for new defense companies, technology for only national security, science only for profit national security if there's private sector collaborators, a kind of erosion of basic research. So to get, why we can do something like AI now, why we can do whatever this quantum commercialization thing that is happening right now is because there were federal investments in basic research a generation prior, and that people didn't know what we're going to, and we, I think, we very much need to get back to that space, but a space in which the public has a bit more insight and a bit more say on what that is and what that looks like.
Unfortunately, we still live in capitalism, and that means we need to talk about our partners and sponsors. But fortunately, our partners and sponsors are great. And if you want to support Dreaming Against the Machine directly, you can join us on Patreon, where $5 a month gives you the chance to ask questions of upcoming guests and a dedicated stream of cat pictures. We love our patrons, and we also love being a part of the Multitude Collective at multitudeshows.com. Multitude is a podcast company made up of passionate people creating shows you can count on. Shows like This Guy Sucked. This Guy Sucked is a history podcast for haters by haters. Join historian Dr. Claire Aubin and a new expert every week to pull back the scholarly curtain on some of the world's biggest bummers. From Charlemagne to Carl Schmitt, every episode gives listeners all the ammo they need to win dinner table arguments over why history's main characters were actually kind of the worst. No dead person is safe, and the show's guests prove that the best part of understanding the past is criticizing it. New episodes every Thursday wherever you listen to podcasts. And here's a word from our sponsors. I was just thinking while you were talking about how, yes, we make those investments and it really does feel like the business model, or I don't feel like the business model, it is the business model for some of these companies to, have the government subsidize the risky part of the research and then we socialize the costs of the risky parts of the research and then privatize the benefits.
100%.
And I feel like part of the disconnect for the public of, not seeing the value of basic research, not that I'm saying that basic research always has to have a financial return, but it often does. And I think it would be good to have more of those benefits socialized as well. And I suppose they are in the sense that, like, we get the vaccines and whatnot, but it's just the extreme concentrations of private wealth. The obvious example here, I guess, is Elon Musk.
Yeah.
That money that he has, a lot of it comes from doing that on a mass scale, letting the government subsidize the risky
Yes.
parts, and then he just reaps the profits.
You and I know that, but I think a lot of other people don't. I mean, I
Yeah.
think people driving their Teslas and using Starlink, which is increasingly becoming a utility for the
Oof.
world,
Yeah.
don't really and this is where I think I have such mixed feelings about the Trump administration taking sort of financial stakes in companies. But when you look at something like Tesla, that was really, quite a bit financed by American taxpayer money in a first instance. You do think like, well, sort of what's in it for the rest of us who sort of helped to sort of build the capacity to do this. So I also think, there's a consolidation of the money and the power and the technology. And then there's the super equally important, particularly for a figure like Musk, is the capture of the imagination, right? And
Yeah.
so I think, and I don't, I didn't live during the age of the robber barons. I've only read about, the progressive era and kind of how people were, but we didn't have the sort of mass communication in the same way.
Yeah.
And I think what makes this moment so terrifying sometimes actually is that power consolidation, like sort of literally on all of these different valences all at once, including the very ability to imagine and articulate and actually disseminate, like, your idea of what a good future looks like.
Well, I mean, you know this, but that's exactly what I was going after in my most recent book.
Yeah.
And I mean, speaking of the robber barons, I guess something that gives me hope is that, we're going through a second Gilded Age, and the first Gilded
Mhm.
Age was followed by the Progressive Era. But yeah, I mean, they really have captured the imagination of what the future could be like. You're right that we didn't have mass communication then the way that we do now, although I suppose it was the early days of, the robber barons were around when we were building out the first systems of mass communication and mass transit, right?
Radio, telephone, mass transit. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Telegraphs. I mean, the thing that really gets me, the thing that I've been really fighting against just in my public life and in my private life, is the ideas that these guys are pushing about AI,
Yeah.
because there is this sense of inevitability, and I keep talking with people, and I mean, I live here in the San Francisco Bay Area, and I see these billboards everywhere, and I've talked about this on previous episodes, but like the idea that AI is eating our idea of what the future can be.
Mhm.
And I think that that's a real tragedy, right? We have so many ways the future could be, and we are being told, no, this one technology with this one vision of what it is inevitable and has to keep going, and it is going to be the single most important thing. And putting aside questions about, like, okay, why are we calling large language models AI? The harms that are inflicted by building these things in the first place, the environmental
Yep.
harms, and putting aside the sort of personal social harms that are created by putting them out into the world, like the incidence of AI psychosis and whatnot. Just
Yep.
this idea of the way that, I mean, to use another historically loaded word, but the way that the idea of AI has colonized our idea of the future
Yep. 100%.
is, I think, something that we really need to fight against.
Totally agree.
Tell me about how you think about that. I mean, you spent a lot of time thinking about AI.
I'll talk about it. Maybe in two ways. First
Sure.
will be around policy, because I think there's that we need to bring a different kind of philosophical approach to policymaking around technology. And if we think about people think about policy and they think about getting going to a policy school to get a degree, but policy really is an articulation of a future, right? Like you are saying, and so I try to think about policy as kind of proscriptive, kind of future text. Like this is a possible future that we could have if this law is passed, if this policy is implemented. And it is saying that this is the current state, and we're trying to steward a future state that looks like this, and the policy becomes the vehicle for doing that, right? So I think when you get to AI, when people tell you that what should drive policy is the technology itself, right? You lose the ability to. This is one of the ways the futures get captured, right? So they're just like, well, the only I was at a conference in London over the weekend, and I got a really smart question, but the person said, the technology is moving so fast, we can't possibly create any policy around it. And it's just like, well, policy is not the technology, like this sort of sense that like every time you get a new release of you go from Opus 4.5 to 4.8 or whatever, I don't even know what version we're at right now, that like you need to have a new policy, as opposed to saying that policy is the future state that we want. So if we want a future state in which, and we can argue about what the future state is, where these technologies aren't used at all, where, my preference is like they are used, they are reined in, they are responsible, that you've got you've got sort of across the life cycle of them, ways to check in, see what they're doing, everything from risk assessments to pre-deployment assessments to audits after they're released, all of that. But if you only focus on the technology, we're not building the capacity to say, we want a policy future state that like requires these things to happen, and that requires that like public investments, in technology, should be the thing, and public expectations about technology. They shouldn't dirty our water, drive up our electric bills by 25%, et cetera, should be the thing on which policy is set, not the new release of the technology. So I think the policy space is so hard right now because lawmakers and advocates are allowing themselves to be captured by narratives that say that you only make policy around the technologies, instead of anchoring it in the true north, which is like, what are social goods and what are public goods? And then how do we create policy that requires the purveyors, developers, and builders of these technologies to meet those benchmarks, like to meet those social good benchmarks, right? As opposed to a new technical benchmark. So that's one way I'd answer. Another is, I've been doing a project with a colleague at Harvard named Moira Weigel, who's she's a comparativist. She's a literature scholar.
Oh, yeah,
Moira.
I know her.
Yeah. So Moira and I have a project, and part is like thinking about not just that, industry leaders, VCs, private equity folks have captured our future imagination, but what are the genres that they use to do so? So the project is looking, we've got a postdoc colleague, Karina Albrecht, who's working on like sort of CEO keynote addresses, like, everything from like, Steve Jobs to Jensen Huang. It's like, what are the futures that are told in these kind of once a year, maybe twice a year kind of product release, kind of, Lollapaloozas that are not just, they're marketing, and the marketing is selling you a future, right? If you use this product with a new release of Siri or whatever, X things happen in the world. I'm working in particular on manifestos. Like I'm very interested in the manifesto as a form, both as a historical form. Like, so if you think of it, if you go back to the Italian futurists, you think about the 80s and 90s, you think about, or the early aughts, you think about cyber manifestos. There was a lot of kind of feminist artist coalitions working on manifestos. And now thinking about the manifesto today, which is not an artifact or a genre of a collective, right? So you don't have to agree with the Italian futurists, but that manifesto was intended to like represent a collective vision of something. Ditto kind of feminist art manifestos, et cetera. Whereas the manifesto today is like one guy and his grievance, you
Yeah,
know?
like Mark Andreessen, for example.
So we've got this corpus of manifestos. We're coding them. They're super fascinating, and we're having friends and neighbors help with some of the coding. But I think, they share with past manifestos of different kinds of political ilks. That something's gone wrong in the world. We want to make it right. This is how we think we should do it. But I think this moment is so interesting in that the manifesto has become this vehicle of an individual. Like, it's not about a movement. It's me and what I think the world should be, and that I should have the power and authority to forecast and disseminate to the world my idea of what everybody else's future should look like. They often don't even include a gesture at enrollment, like, Adam, you've read my manifesto. Don't you agree? Don't you want to join? Like, there's not a call to action or an attempt to enroll. It's just like, I doth say, and like, we should sort of keep moving. So there's also like the pitch deck, which is, I think, a way in which the future is kind of captured. So we're trying to look at these different, not only that the future is captured, but the ways, the gestures, and the genres that it takes, the forms it takes.
Oh my God, I have so much to say about this. You know how I feel about Andreessen's manifesto, the techno-optimist manifesto. I loathe it. It's one of my favorite punching bags, and to the point where I sometimes feel like I'm overdoing it or I'm not being fair. And then I remember, no. Mark Andreessen is so far up there. I could punch all day long and I would still be punching up.
Yeah.
It is such an aggrieved document. The funniest line in it is when he says we believe in a total rejection of resentment. And I'm like, really,
Yes.
buddy? This is one giant piece of resentment. And what he resents, and this goes back to your first point, is that anyone is even possibly talking about regulation of tech at all. I mean,
Right.
I feel like in some ways that entire manifesto, this is almost certainly an overstatement, and I don't know what was going on in his head, but I think in some ways that entire manifesto is just Mark Andreessen saying, I don't like that Lena Khan has a position of power.
Right.
This idea that AI is moving too fast to regulate, this is just the latest version of something that Silicon Valley has been saying since its earliest days, or at least since the earliest days of the modern incarnation of the tech industry, in the, I don't know, late 80s, 90s. In the early days of the internet, they were saying, oh, well, it's moving too fast. You can't regulate it. And
Yes.
there were manifestos then too, right? I mean, the
Yes.
Declaration of Independence of Cyberspace.
Exactly.
And we've seen what that leads to, right?
Yeah.
Because people listened to them. People thought, oh yeah, they're right. It is moving too fast to regulate. And then this is where we ended up.
But even something like the Declaration of the Independence of Cyberspace, or some of the 90s to early aughts manifestos, at the very least, like, even if you didn't agree with them, we're trying to make a collective claim for other,
Yeah.
I think what I find so striking about the kind of contemporary tech manifesto version is that they're just often about the self.
Yeah.
And like the will to power of the self. And, we don't, we're not in a bigger world. It doesn't, I don't care what everyone else thinks. I mean, I think you talk about the techno-optimist manifesto. It's really like, there's constraint all around me and I shall not be constrained. And like, so on the one hand, right, we want agency and freedom, but on the other hand, to live in society, to live in community means that there are some constraints on all of us, right? To have a marriage means that there's some constraints, right? As we know. And so
sure, but like they sorry, not to interrupt, but
No,
like
please.
that's exactly what they don't believe, right? They don't
Correct,
believe
yes.
that we live in a society as the meme says.
No, exactly. And so you see that kind of manifest in utopian to some, dystopic to most of us, these articulations of futures that only apply to a few, don't include people, like the manifesto is a genre of grievance. And I think it's not for naught that the acceleration of that as the genre form of articulating futures is what we're living with right now. I mean, I think it says a lot about the politics of this moment. What more perfect genre could there be for polarization, for polarized, a kind of society than the manifesto in some regard. Yeah.
I'm thinking about what you said. It hadn't occurred to me, but of course you're completely right that the manifesto used to be a sort of collective articulation and now is this more personal thing when it comes from the tech industry. And I just have to think that that has to do with the rise of tech billionaires, right? The difference
Mm.
between the tech industry at the time of the Declaration of Independence of Cyberspace, which when was that? That was like 94, somewhere around
Something
there.
like that. Yeah. Yeah.
And Andreessen's Techno-Optimist Manifesto, which is what, 30 years later, 2023, is that in 1994, there were no tech, billionaires, or there certainly were no software billionaires, except maybe Bill Gates.
Bill Gates. Yeah.
Yeah. But other than that, like there weren't, the tech industry was not the single dominant industry of American society at the time. I mean,
Correct.
it was certainly not financially. That was, I don't know, in the early 90s or mid 90s, I guess that would have been banking or something like that. Whereas
Mm-hmm.
now, um, it's the tech industry, and suddenly we have this, this second Gilded Age and these robber barons in a way that we did not have in the 90s. And so, of course, they're going to go out there and say, well, this is my feeling, except Mark Andreessen in his manifesto is still using the first person plural, right? He still says we without saying who we are.
And I think that's distinctive. I mean, it makes the claim for the we, but it's really not a we, or it doesn't define the we or describe the we. Yeah. So, anyways, we could go down that rabbit hole for a while, but I mean, I think some of the way, you said, you're trying to sort of fight back in the narrative way. I think partly what, Moira, Karina, and I and some other colleagues are trying to do is understand the sort of narrative form that these claims on the future take, and the power, like, what is the emotional power? Manifestos have an emotional power, right?
Yeah.
I think, I was really interested, we can talk about Alex Karp, sent out
God.
a couple of months ago, a tweet that was, best I can tell, I don't know what chatbot, Claude Grok distillation of his book.
Yeah.
And it was, I think it's 26 or 28 statements. And immediately everyone is like, there's this CARP manifesto. And like,
Yep.
so like, why is it called a manifesto? I was immediately like, why is it called a manifesto? And I think
Yeah.
it's like, one guy, there's grievance. It's like, we don't want the state to get in our way. We think, we don't want, we're the most powerful nation in the world. We should decide all the things. Again, speaking of the we, but not really trying to enroll, a we, like just using a kind of royal we, let's say. And then another example a few weeks later was when Pope Leo released the Magnificat Humanica, and and there was some attempts to, in the in the discourse, to sort of frame it as a manifesto.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, I'm very interested in those turns, and I thought, like, it's not a manifesto. It is like, it has a formal kind of, a kind of a, it is the sort of Pope speaking to the world and not only to the small community of Catholics. So it's a document that's meant to be speaking to the world. And also it's a document that is making, different from Karp's tweet or Andreessen's Techno-Optimist Manifesto, that's like sort of making claims for the common good, and about sort of where AI should sit in a global community, and that has an actual real we, and also is naming stakes and claims for actual we's, that are not sort of disguised as a we, which is actually an I.
Just to bring our listeners in, Alex Karp is the CEO of Palantir, the absolutely horrible tech surveillance and military contractor. His book, what I think the Technological Republic, I think is what it's called, something like that. If you want to see a good breakdown of what it is actually about, that is not an AI summary, go have a look at friend of the show and past guest Dave Karp has a Blue Sky thread about it, and a post about it on his Substack. But hi, Dave, I know you're listening.
Hi, Dave.
Yeah. Anyway, I have so many more things that I would want to ask you, but I know that we're running short on time. So I am going to ask you two last questions real quick. The first one is, What is your favorite piece of science fiction and why? Or, speculative fiction about what a future could look like?
Oh, I'm just going to tell you the two things I've been watching recently because that's usually
Absolutely.
my favorite. Well, okay,
Yeah.
my all-time favorite forever is always going to be Octavia Butler.
Yeah.
It's always going to be Kindred, which people don't place in the science fiction category. It's one of her early novels.
Yeah, but it is science fiction.
It is science fiction, and it also is so resonant with the experience of Black people or people, and I think
Yeah.
maybe it resonates with you given your family's history, the sense that you could always be snatched back. Like
Yeah.
that you could always, like, for all the progress, for all the change. I've been also thinking about Kindred because it's set during the bicentennial. So as we're having our
God. Yeah.
semquintennial, kind of celebrations, it's all of the like it starts in June of 1976. The end of it is July 4th, 1976, and it's just like her being snatched back to the past in this sort of sense that we live past, present, future all at once. So that's like all time, hands down. That book changed my life forever.
Yeah.
But what I've been watching are different things. So I've just started watching Starfleet Academy.
Oh,
Love.
God. I really, really need to watch it. I'm so excited to see it.
It gives you all the like Star Trek goodness, but it's also got like new characters and there's new races from different planets and, just all of that like sort of goodness. There's always, I think, in all of those, the sense of the underdog and the sense of looming kind of global, kind of domination. And this series, they've come out of much like, I mean, go back to Butler, much like sort of Parable of the Sower, have come out of like a deeply dystopic time. And it's sort of, what does it mean in this case to like rebuild Starfleet Academy? What does it
Yeah.
mean in the Butler case to sort of rebuild a communal life and a communal religion, communal spirituality for all of us? Then I stumbled across something called the Copenhagen test. Do you know what this is on Peacock?
No, what is this?
Which is okay. So it's fascinating on a couple of levels. So it's about a Chinese American spy. So I think he's like a CIA operative or something. But because he's Chinese American, he is distrusted. Like,
Right.
so it's like, well, your country of origin. So there's this kind of through line that we know from if you read kind of any Asian American studies or kind of ethnic studies literature, this kind of constant questioning of like loyalty, of true citizenship, like whether or not your parents were, your family was here in California during the gold rush like 200 years ago, whatever. It's
Yeah.
this kind of question. But it is also this kind of sci-fi thriller bit, without giving too much away. He's basically like a walking Wi-Fi tower. Someone has biohacked his brain, and all of this kind of espionage and intrigue ensues. It's like
Huh.
absolutely fascinating. So my all-time favorites are always in Octavia Butler world, but those are my current two favorites.
I love this answer.
What about you? What about you?
Oh, God. Well, okay. So first of all, let me explain why I love your answer while I'm thinking in the back of my head about what my answer is. But no, I love this answer not only because you've given me a new piece of science fiction to go take a look at. I've never heard of the Copenhagen test, but also I'm so glad, A, that you're a Star Trek fan, and B, that I didn't find this out until the end of the episode, because otherwise that's all we would have talked about.
Oh, we could have gone there. Yes.
Yeah. We'll have to have you back and just talk about Star
Okay.
Trek. But for me, I mean, I'm just going to do the same thing you did and talk about what I've been reading and watching lately. So one TV show and one book. I really enjoyed Pluribus, and I'm
Yes.
very excited for the next season. And I'm currently reading a very odd sort of science fiction series that I think it's obviously science fiction. I think some people would disagree. I did find
Sure.
it in the science fiction section of a bookstore. It's called On the Calculation of Volume, and it's about a
Huh.
woman trapped in a time loop. And it's a series of books, originally in Danish. They're very short, and each one is very short, but there's apparently 7 volumes, and only I think 4 of them have been translated into English so far. So I'm just finishing up the first one, and it's fascinating. Anyway, we have time for one more very quick question, I think. So I am going to ask you, Alondra, what are you feeling hopeful about?
I think I am feeling, I mean, this ties to our whole conversation. I'm feeling hopeful that I come from a tradition, a genealogy, a community of people and their allies who just keep going. I mean, who just have like literally faced genocide, faced,
Yeah.
literally being chattel. And so as much as I find this moment deeply, deeply challenging, I find it worrisome. I am working arms locked with others as much as I can to help there be a different outcome and play like in science policy and people's lived experience, et cetera. I just feel like I can only have hope because I know it's been so much worse, and yet here I am
Yeah.
with all of the opportunities and the agency that I have. And so I know that I think sometimes people want answers that are not tied to the past in a sort of way, but that for me is so foundational. It is the wellspring, it is the power, it's the energy that that is like just is the undercurrent for everything in my life and has been, good times and bad times.
Yeah.
So
No.
that means, just a news clip from this week. I served on I spent part of my time in New York City. I'm a registered voter in New York City, even though I work in New Jersey. And I served on the transition committee for Mayor Mamdani. And this week they've just announced a new technology initiative, which is called the PIT Crew, which is Public Interest Technology Crew, which is sort of taking some ideas from, the US Digital Service and others. But again, to that point I was saying about anchoring and values in the true north, is saying, what would it mean to use technology to make New York City fair, more just, more affordable, more inclusive? When I was asked to join government, the thing I thought immediately was like, wow, this is really hard. It's the only thing, I was like the A student. I always got the gold star starting in kindergarten. You know who we are. Like, so it's the one thing I've been asked to do where I know is going to fail. Like when you go into government, you're not going to be like, I'm going to ace it. I'm going to stick the landing. Everyone's going to like cheer me. There's going to be a standing ovation. Like you just know there will just be people disappointed.
Yep.
So I hope they like totally stick the landing on Pit Crew. But I think, even if they get it half right, what a different vision for like how technology can sort of benefit society. So those kinds of things, like in the midst of everything that people are trying experiments with AI policy on the state level and places like, New York and Illinois and Colorado also make me hopeful. And I've just had a beach vacation with my 11 and 12-year-old great nieces who giggle about everything. Like everything is like joy and happiness and bubbles. And, and that gives me hope as well.
Well, I can't think of a better place to stop than there. So, Alondra, thank you. That's such a great answer. And it's been such a pleasure having you on the show. Thank you.
Thank you, Adam. So good to see you and so great to be in conversation.
Thanks again to this week's guest, Alondra Nelson. Next week, we have Lucian Walkowicz and Erica Nesvold, and I'll be talking with them about space colonization. Bad idea. None of us like it. But why? And what's the alternative? I mean, one of the alternatives, I suppose, is doing nothing. But yeah, there's all sorts of good stuff in next week's episode, including one of my favorite phrases ever, a miscalibrated bummer meter. So, see you then. To submit questions for future guests and to suggest other guests, and to see more pictures of Babka, join the conversation on Patreon. You can also find us on YouTube, on Instagram at DATMpod, on the web and on Blue Sky at dreamingagainstthemachine.com, or just find us wherever you get your podcasts. Dreaming Against the Machine is a proud member of Multitude Productions. Our executive producer is Nick Carissimi. Our theme music is by Jared Emerson Johnson. Our show logo is by Nick James. And our fearless leader is Babka, the greatest cat in the observable universe. I'm Adam Becker, and I'll see you next week.